number two. What can I say about number two? Okay, so when I started to learn this, actually number two, I have to confess, I think is probably one of the easier ones in terms of finger work in the book. It lies quite nicely under the fingers. So when I hadn't played it in a little while, I have to confess. So I started a few days ago, a couple of days back, and I started with the metronome, of course, and I started it about half the tempo I wanted to finish at. So I reckon my goal was about 110, something like that. So I started just over half tempo. So I started at 70 and I played it through chunk by chunk. So I practiced a couple of lines at a time, really this slow tempo, adding on little by little until I got to the end of the study and I could play the whole thing through at that tempo. Just making sure that I never played wrong notes. I don't want to learn the wrong notes in, because then as I start to get faster, the wrong notes will still be there and they're almost impossible to get rid of. So taking real care over that. Also just really checking the articulations, because some of them are kind of across the beat, and the accents and all this kind of thing, just kind of getting a real shape and feel of the study. Once I got confident at 70 and I was happy with how it was sounding, I would then slowly inch that metronome up, maybe 5 clicks at a time. If I was feeling really cocky, maybe I'd go for 10 clicks. And I'd also add in a few different rhythms. Nothing particularly mind-blowing here. I'm sure you've heard all this 1,000 times before from your teachers. So I'd add in a dotted rhythm that would go something like this perhaps. And then I would also reverse the dot. But you can really do whatever rhythm you like, just to make things a little more complicated, because if you can really do it at that complicated rhythm, you can definitely do it exactly how the composer has intended. And that was pretty much it, just using this system, very straightforward, very unoriginal I'm afraid, but just slowly building it up until I got to the tempo that I wanted to record it at. In terms of what I think you should be thinking of when you practice for the students, of course, there's some really amazing flute players taking part in this series who are far more experienced and skilled than I am. So they may perhaps have much greater insight than me, but there are 3 things that I wanted to share with you that I think about in my own playing and also when I'm teaching my students what I'm suggesting to them. The first of these is really thinking about what is the purpose to all of this, because this book is not a book composed and intended to be played in a concert. We know that. They're studies, they're etudes. And the difference between a concert piece and an etude is that the study was written with a purpose in mind, and that purpose was to highlight a technical difficulty on our instrument. And the idea is that by the time we finish practicing the study, we've made some progress and we're a little more skilled at overcoming that particular technical challenge than when we started practicing the study. And so every single study we ever play has got at least one of these technical challenges built in. That's its whole purpose. Sometimes there's a whole heap of technical challenges, and sometimes there's just the one. You've got to sit and look and think and listen and play and figure out what the challenge is, why the composer intended this. And sometimes it's really obvious, sometimes it takes a little bit more experimentation and a little bit more exploration to find it. In this particular study, the A minor one, there's a couple of different things. Of course, we've got to worry about being accurate with the rhythm. We've got to make sure that the sound is even across the articulations and also across the different registers. But for me, the one that I think is the most challenging in this is the flexibility. Now, by flexibility, I mean how we adjust and alter our embouchure and our lips and the direction of the air when we play to make sure that every single note we play is completely in focus, crystal clear and beautiful sounding. Now this idea of flexibility is a challenge almost in everything we ever play, and certainly in a lot of etudes, but this is something I really wanted to think about in this etude because the registers change quite suddenly. Actually, if you look at the very beginning of the study, we start on a low E, which isn't the worst note of course to play, but it's certainly not the best. So we really have to make sure we're going to start with the right embouchure, because we don't want, when we give it some punch at the beginning, we don't want to get this. You know, it's easily done. We don't want it. We want to get a really nice low E, really thinking of dropping the jaw, big cavity in my mouth, like almost like there's a tennis ball in there, certainly at the back of the mouth, and I'm going to pump the air right down to where the low E keys are on the flute. I I want to get a really good E. So make sure the embouchure is exactly where it needs to be for that first note. But then it changes, of course, because within 2 bars we're going up to a top E, 2 octaves higher, and then annoyingly there's no bar numbers in this, but if we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 lines down, the second measure, we've got a middle A to a high A octave, so big embouchure change there. And just to make matters even worse, we're going from this octave leap in forte straight away into a middle G at piano. At least in my edition I had these dynamics written in. So a completely different embouchure required for that. So it's really important we take the time to learn and teach ourselves and build into our muscle memory where exactly we need to place these notes, or we're going to not play them in the right place. In fact, if we just take this little passage, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so this is 5 lines down where it starts from that G, it kind of goes up and down all through the middle and lower middle registers. If I find a good G, so there's where I'm going to place the G, but let's say I play this passage and I never change anything. I just blow in the same place for the G, but I move my fingers. What's going to happen? I'll do it slow. That doesn't sound so good. So I'm really having to follow the shape of the music with my lips, actually, because so many of these notes have some adjustments required to get them really in the right place. So spend some time listening to these notes. If you play a note that doesn't sound as good as it should sound, stop, find out where it needs to be, find out what you have to do, and then start slowly putting it back together with the embouchures in the right place. The next point I want to talk about is playing expressively. It's very easy to play etudes and studies a bit mechanically and a bit robotically, but I think we have to hold the composers who write etudes, we have to hold them to almost a higher standard than the composers who write concert repertoire. I'll explain why. Because if a composer has to write a piece for a concert, usually I imagine they have free rein, they can do whatever they like, and they can do whatever artistically pleases them. But when it comes to writing a study, they're limited. Before the first note they write, they're limited because they know that the purpose of the whole piece is to have this technical challenge in there. So the limitations are in place before the first note, and then they have to write this piece that's fun and beautiful and melodic and appeals to flute players and hopefully to the listener as well, but still has this technical challenge. So that, I think, is a real skill to be able to do that. And Boehm, of course, Mr. Boehm designed our mechanism on our flute. He really knows what he's doing when it comes to flute playing, and actually I think he really knows what he's doing when it comes to composing. So as players, we owe him the benefit of playing his music expressively. I think that's what he would have wanted. And actually, this isn't that hard to do, because although these pieces are unaccompanied, it's very easy to hear the harmony. It's quite straightforward, and even though you can't physically hear the harmony, because there's only one line playing at a time, you can definitely in your head hear the harmony, and it gives you a great sense of how to shape and how to phrase the music. And I think it's really important to bring this out as much as you possibly can. I have this lovely little moment that I think is great. My favourite bit, third line from the bottom of the first page, where you have this kind of little duet with yourself. So the first flute player is playing this little tune. I mean, you can't help but smile when you hear it. And the second flute player has the little twiddle beside it. Even that little accompaniment can be really fun and really expressive. What I don't think I would enjoy hearing is something like this. Yeah, of course we're aiming for evenness and clarity, but much more importantly, we have to have our evenness, our clarity, and then we have to make great music on top of that. again, we have this embouchure challenge of getting the low notes to pop out with the accompaniment an octave higher. And these pieces are unaccompanied, so there is an element of freedom that we can have. Now, we still have to be strict with the rhythm, we still have to be strict with the pulse, but we can control the pulse. We can definitely take that liberty. And as long as we're controlling it and we're not letting it rule us, then I think it's absolutely fine. So there are a few little moments where I think you can take some grace with it. And the third thing I want to talk about is breathing. Not specifically how actually we breathe, but where we breathe. I have two different editions of this set of studies. This one, which is the Chester edition, which is edited by Trevor Y. He has all the breath marks in. The other edition I have has no breath marks in, and I think there are definitely pros and cons to both. Actually, in this edition, I think most of the breath marks are really good, and I think they make perfect musical sense. There is, however, one or two that I changed. Now, for years and years, I felt very guilty about changing anything because we buy all this music and these complete flute legends have taken the time to edit it for us, and then we just go and ignore it. But actually, I don't feel so guilty now because I don't ignore most of it, but if I don't agree with something, then I try and find the courage to change it, and I recommend you do the same. Find that courage if you can, but make sure you're changing it for the right reasons. That's what's important. Don't change it to suit your weaknesses in your playing. Change it to enhance the musicianship within what you're playing. Now, a lot of the time I open a study, and if someone's edited it, they have the breath marks right in the bar line, and it drives me nuts. I don't like it a lot of the time. I like it usually one note later, so I play the first note of the next bar and then breathe. The reason being that I think doing that allows you to hear the harmony rolling and progressing forward, and therefore things sound more fun, more expressive, and more lyrical as well. Now, most of the time in this edition, he does that, certainly in this study. I haven't looked at the others. There's one or two places though he puts it on the bar line, and I would rather it one note later. I'll show you exactly what I mean. Let's find a moment. Okay, here we go, right towards the end. 1, 2, 3, 4 lines from the end. The breath marks he has in are almost always on the bar line. In fact, they're all on the bar line here. I'll demonstrate for you. I'm going to take way too many breaths, but I'll take them all on the bar line, just so you can see why I don't like it. Again, this is just very personal choice, but I thought I would tell you my exact thoughts. So here's too many breaths, but on the bar line to explain. Now, of course, I'm not going to take anywhere near that amount of breaths, but let's say I'm going to do it one more time, but this time I'll just take the breaths one semiquaver later. Only one semiquaver. I know that sounds like nothing, but it makes such a difference, I think, to the music. Again, way too many breaths, but let's put it in context. Here's what's written with the breath on the bar line. Now let's put it one note later, one semiquaver later. I hope that makes sense. That's just a personal taste of mine, and I think really be careful where you take the breaths, and really organised where you take the breaths as well. There's no harm, no shame at all in marking them in. In fact, I would recommend it because this thing flies along. And so that's pretty much it. There's the 3 points I think are really important. To really, number one, to really analyse what the purpose of every etude you ever play is. In this particular one, for me, the biggest thing I wanted to work on was the flexibility. Number two is to make every single thing you ever play beautiful and expressive and musical, and not just make it mechanical and boring. And number three, to be really organised and really thoughtful about where you take the breath to enhance the musical purpose, rather than just because perhaps at time we need them. I hope that makes sense. I look forward to hearing everyone's versions. To do 24 of these is quite a feat. I'm not sure if I will manage all 24, but I'll give it a go. I really appreciate you guys listening, and I look forward to all your versions, and happy practicing.